All right.
So, what we wanted to focus on today, at least in the first half hour, is election security, as in cybersecurity, not physical security, although there may be some issues with that as well. But Jocelyn, our Secretary of State, has prohibited folks from carrying guns at polling places, which makes a lot of sense to me. Wasn't sure why they would do that anyway, but it's Michigan, so we have all sorts of folks here. But what we're going to focus on, we have Richard Stiennon and Dan Lohrmann, two of our cybersecurity experts. And I'm going to see what they have to say about the issue of how, I guess the big concerns somewhat whether the voting rolls might get hacked, because I guess some of them, they attempted to do that in 2016. We think that was the Russians. The other issue, of course, is the mail-in ballots, but I don't know whether that we have concerns there. But I'll let you guys run from here and take over. Whoever wants to start. Do you have any concerns, or do we have this under control, or where are we at?
You waving at me, Dan? Well, every single sector of the industry, every single sector of government learn security as they go. And they don't get serious about it until there's some serious incursions and breaches. And then just like for individuals, right? All your friends on Facebook don't learn to turn on the Facebook strong authentication, using your cell phone to authenticate you until after they've been hacked. And they have to email all their friends and say, my account was hacked, blah, blah, I'm going to, and you learn that over time. Many of us learned it a lot earlier before some of these social media sites were around. Same with large enterprises. They're just totally oblivious. Then there's major breach. They find out about it from the credit card agency. Then they hire a CISO and get serious about it. And usually you don't hear about them in the news for cybersecurity anymore. There's an infinite array of companies that are still in that state. Now, in my experience, Dan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but state and local governments are way behind the times, right? They've never had budget set aside. They've got no reason to take security seriously unless they've suffered ransomware attacks recently and they've had to pay ransomware. And all of a sudden they realize, oh, hey, our entire ability to do what we're supposed to do as, elected and appointed officials depends on technology. A lot of them are the age of, everybody on this call. They grew up without having any of that technology. They probably had their first computer only a few years ago. They don't realize that everything depends on this technology, and security is going to be a really big problem. But after saying all that, even though I'll say that, yes, the organizations in charge of voting are horribly prepared from a security perspective, a cybersecurity perspective, I'm not concerned about election security because there are 3,141 separate entities, all with different infrastructure for counting the vote. The polling places, all managed by counties, and if most states are like Michigan, I'm sure there are some that have a statewide technology infrastructure. So they all use different technology. They all have different processes in place, and it's something that's growing up over 200 years as they figure out how to effectively count a vote. That said, there will for sure be hacks of the election offices, and I'm not worried about the votes being miscast, possibly miscounted. I'm worried about how certain entities will take advantage of the knowledge of that hacking to cast the entire vote into doubt. So that's kind of my statement, I guess. What do you think, Dan?
Yeah, no, thanks. And thanks, Mike and Matt, and for having me on today. And Richard, I largely agree with you. I think I'm a little bit more concerned. 5 days ago, the Department of Homeland Security, CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency, came out with an alert, said that some of the agencies have already been hacked. There's reports out there. You can see them on Fox, CNN, whatever AP. They're all out there. I guess overall, I am with you, Richard, that I think that I feel relatively confident that this is going to go smoothly. I guess there's a couple things I would say in specifics. I mean, we know that the databases, the peripheral systems have been hacked. story here, hackers targeted virtual private network flaw and net login. Couple vendors, Tenable and some others, have said, this just happened last week, have said that all of the patches were available, but they weren't applied. So back to Richard's point, these were systems that maybe have the roles of who can vote and what district, what precinct. There's some vagueness, if you will, some grayness about what they're actually sharing, what happened and what didn't happen. But it sounds a lot like 2016, a little bit revisited. I think by and large, overall, the states have improved. They've gotten a lot better. There's certainly, all eyes are on this. It's been, election, even during the midst of the pandemic, has been the pixie dust in state government, local government system, meaning that it's gotten money. The FBI, the Homeland Security, all of the intelligence community is looking at this or looking at foreign influence. I agree with you, Richard. I think overall, am I worried that there'll be huge hacks of they're not going to hack the machines? We have paper backups. I think by and large, that's good. What worries me the most, honestly, is this. If we get a very close election, if this is a blowout, I think right now Biden's way up in the polls, I think it's a non-story. If we get a very close election, what we always say in cybersecurity, but in technology, in the whole area of how we do what we do in this business, it's people, process, and technology. It's all three: people, process, and technology. And I actually am worried more about the process than the technology, and that is this in this regard. So many states, and there's many states. I know where you're out there right now, Mike, Washington State. There are a lot of states that are all mail-in ballots. They've been doing it for years. They do it well. A lot of other states, their people are talking. I've had some states, Delaware, some others, where they're talking 10x, 20x, even more of what the mail-in ballots were before. Now, so the question then becomes, in a very close election, I don't think it's going to be close in Delaware, but I in some states, including Michigan and others, how will that counting work? These stories, and part of it's all wrapped in one. It's not any one thing. It's with the fake news, with the foreign influence. I mean, right now, we don't know that the whole Biden story in the New York Post, and I don't want to get into politics here. I want to stay, on technology and cybersecurity. But, is it real? Was it not? We more emails again, right? We heard about Hillary emails 4 years ago. Now we have the Biden emails. Most people think they weren't real. But again, we don't know for sure. I don't know for sure those emails real or not. I mean, from Hunter Biden and all that. My point is not whether you believe it or not, or whether you're going to vote for Biden or Trump. That's not what I'm getting at. But like influence, and then the challenge of when we count those votes, if it's really close in those states. And to your point, I agree with you, Richard. It's so distributed around the country. By and large, 90% are going to be fine. The question is, the bad guys know that if you can target 10%, those real battleground districts within the battleground states, what happens there if we get really close? I mean, I think that's my biggest fear, and the integrity of the process. Not that it won't be done well, but how will you know? I mean, how will people believe that in fact the processes were followed, we weren't overwhelmed by counting votes by mail, et cetera? So I worry more about the social media influence, foreign governments, and then the perception of what that means in an election where a lot of people say, and I'm not against mail-in ballots, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying it's going to be a big change from previous years. We're going to have a lot more mail-in ballots. I mean, I think that's my actual biggest fear, is how states do with many people. By the way, one last point, we talk about physical security. Mike, you mentioned, a lot of elderly people run those polling stations, and a lot of them will not be coming out. So you're going to have a lot of new people in those polling stations. I'm going to vote in person. I'm not going to do by mail. And, it'll be interesting to see, is it the same people we've been seeing for the last 3-4 years, or is it a whole new group of people that are in there? So I think that's my biggest fear. And it is a cybersecurity fear because it's all this wrapped together in one bundle.
I have two questions for you guys. First of all, a comment that here in Michigan, I think all of our secretaries of states and city clerks and township clerk staffs should have been getting ready for a huge influx of mail-in ballots or absentee ballots anyway, just because that law was passed in 2018. this is no surprise for us because of the pandemic. They knew this was coming. The kinds of hacking I was wondering about is, are you worried about people hacking into voter rolls and voter systems and just like taking people off the voter rolls to cause chaos? I mean, is that something we need to worry about?
Richard?
That's a very scary prospect, but that could really mess things up. I know I went to the primary that was in August, right? And I hadn't got my mail-in ballot in time, so I had to show up in person. I showed up and, they swiped my driver's license and blip, there was an issue because they issued me a mail-in ballot. I couldn't vote in person. So they just got on the phone to the county clerk's office, actually here in Birmingham, to the local person, cleared it up in a second. They just, checked me as, my mail-in ballot wouldn't work. And that's fine. I mean, in this little third precinct in our district, probably 150 people voted. But, there's going to be all 12,000 people are going to vote probably coming up in 2 weeks. So they won't be able answering the phone and making manual changes like that. So I agree that could be an incredibly powerful hack. You just do one of those every 5 minutes, you shut it all down.
Yeah, another thing I saw about a week ago, I think I sent it to you, Richard, maybe 2 weeks ago. There was some talk, there's already been a lot of ransomware incidents with the various city governments, state governments around the country. And there was some speculation that if you really wanted to cause chaos, you would hit some cities with some ransomware attack on or before election day and really screw things up. Do you think that's a possibility?
Completely. It's probably, happening anyways, but the ones that are around election day are going to be associated with it. That's for sure.
I agree. Well, I know. In terms of hacking the actual election results, if a lot of places do it the way I live in Dearborn, and if a lot of places do it the way we do it in Dearborn, I'm less concerned about that because none of it's connected to the internet. Yeah. The individual polling places have ballot counting machines that essentially record the results on a thumb drive. It doesn't look like a thumb drive. It's a proprietary thing because of the company, but that's what it is. And then they take those to the city clerk's office and she adds all of them up, again, not connected to the internet, and puts something else on a thumb drive and sends that to Wayne County downtown to add to the county total. So at no point could you get into those numbers because they're not connected to the internet. And I'm hoping most other jurisdictions do something like that. So
let me just add on that point, Matt. I mean, I agree with you. And again, I think Michigan does a really good job. And there was some recent studies that gave Michigan very high marks on how we do our election systems. But there were some that gave low marks to Florida. And I don't know if you guys, again, more stories out there.
Another reason to hate
Florida's got a history here, counting Chads going back 20 years ago.
Yeah,
with the hanging Chads, will it be hanging, something else, data or something. And they were saying some of those systems were connected to the internet, some systems that actually were, in fact, in Ohio, that were retrofitted and changed in Ohio and updated. They did not have the money to do it in Florida. So again, you hear these different stories around the country about different places. They tend to be one-off stories. Most of them can be verified. Is there a risk in Florida? Yeah, there is. I mean, I think the point I would say to your question about voter rolls and ransomware, could it happen? Yes. Am I generally optimistic that these people are working it and will do a good job? I mean, I'm about as optimistic as I am that Michigan State's going to beat Rutgers this Saturday. So it's I think it's going to happen, but could there be a Rutgers upset? I mean, that's kind of how I feel about it. I mean, I do think that there are a lot of things that people may not think about. For example, on the rolls. So Richard, back to your example. You went in person, and we had a panel I was on 2 weeks ago with some people from Estonia and how they do online elections in some other countries around the world. And it's like, all these questions around what if somebody votes online and then they show up in person? What if, I can give you all these different scenarios. Well, you say, well, this is how it's supposed to work, and we can walk through the process. Well, this happens and this happens and this happens. So when I say I'm concerned about the process, and it's the trust of the American people. And again, I think if it's a pretty, if the polls are right and Biden wins by as much as, again, I'm not getting into politics here, but it's not close, then I don't think that's going to be a big issue. If, on the other hand, it's really close, then everyone's going to be looking like, were those processes followed? How was Mary Jo? Did somebody get the vote twice somehow? Did that name get? And then now you're getting at, so what does that have to do with hacking? Well, it does, because from this, if Richard voted by mail, then if he showed up in person, they should have the process and the connectivity to say, you're not eligible to vote in person because you already voted by mail. Are all of those things going to work together, and could somebody somehow influence those processes? That's more where I am more concerned.
Yeah, I think they can mess the processes up, but they can't actually give us completely wrong results for the election.
Oh, I agree.
Right, that we don't know about. We'll figure out that at whatever point the numbers become public, somebody handled it beforehand, and they could say that wasn't the number I reported. So something went wrong.
I agree.
Yeah,
no, I'm with you. And all I'm saying is, like we saw in the Iowa caucuses with, Mike and I did a session on that, with that app that kind of went haywire. I mean, against they got to the right result in the end, but it created a few hours of mayhem on a lot of, TV stations, because nobody got the results in. So, I mean, it's just kind of like, okay, I agree. I think we're going to get to the right result. I think I'm optimistic, and I encourage all listeners to vote. Number one, get out there, get it, make sure you know how to do it, and do it the safest way you want to do it. I do have trust in the system, but I'm not going to tell you, that I have no concerns, because I do. As you mentioned, Richard, think that ransomware or some of these other things, and we have examples right now in Florida and some other states where there are problems.
I'm glad you mentioned Estonia, because they always come up. They're in my mind as a counter to the argument. A lot of security people say, it's impossible to have secure elections. A lot of it because the actual voting machines, are running on Windows and they're never patched and all the rest of that stuff. But Estonia just, they kind of reinvented themselves as a new country in 1991, and they didn't have infrastructure, so everybody just went right to cell phones. So everybody had cell phones, and early on they started putting digital identity, digital certificates in those cell phones. They issued them at the equivalent of a DMV. So all of a sudden you had every adult with a identity that could be used for things like starting companies, whatever, and voting. And they introduced voting, and now everybody can just vote by phone. And they thought of every what if. What if your boss makes you sit down and vote for his candidate? You can change your vote for 24 hours after you submit it. It's just, it's beautiful. And
I agree with you. I'm 100% with you. I think that is the model. And I think for 24, 4 years from now, we should be looking at that. I really do.
Definitely.
I think I'm with you 100%.
And start in small areas. Start with Hawaii.
I'm sorry, Rich, go ahead.
I'm just saying that, we tried this with smart cards back in the day. The idea being that that's how you should do online banking, right? Is have this digital certificate with you. And the trial, it's like a $20 million trial, was on the Upper West Side of New York City. So the total opposite of a contained environment where you could control things, instead of, Hawaii or, Puerto Rico or someplace where you could actually get everybody enrolled and have a good track of it.
So that would be my next question, is how do we improve the system? And of course, we have so many issues in this country. But I mean, is Estonia the model then?
I believe so, from everything I've seen. And I visited Estonia in 2009. They didn't have the voting 100% back then, but they do now. I've heard the CTO of Estonia talk at a conference, and he walked through their whole process. And all we have to do is go and ask them for help, and they can advise us on how to do this.
I agree. I think it is as well. I think Estonia is the model, and it would require, some changes obviously in America, because obviously it's a small country, a couple million people. We're 320 something. But yeah, it's it's definitely a model we should take a hard look at.
Yeah, and then we do have to figure out, not everybody has a cell phone. Granted, right? So you can't, and that is pretty much along economic lines. So you definitely can't have a system that is only people that can afford a $1,200 iPhone. That's not going to work, but I think we can figure it out.
Okay, so to paraphrase Mr. Dillon, everybody must get Estonian. Okay.
All right. Any other points you want to make on this before we turn to some other issues?
Well, I want to say, when I read reports like that one that came out from Security Scorecard, who's basically scanned each state and gave it a score based on what they found. Now, mind you, that's just so minor, right? If you look at the voting registrar website and find vulnerabilities and old software in it, that's a measure of their inability to do security. I agree with that. But I want to point out that Michigan got an A in that. And I credit Dan Lohrmann with that for all the work he put into.
The man who started it all. That's right.
I don't know that I can credit Richard. Thank you.
Come on, you set up the processes. You got us thinking about security practically before any state. And that's why we're probably in such good shape.
Now, we should probably mention that Dan is the former Chief Information Security Officer for the state of Michigan and worked for 17 years at the state.
17 years. Yeah, correct. Yeah, and I called on Richard to give me advice. So, Richard, you deserve, he keynoted several of our first few. We just had another North America International Cyber Summit here in Detroit. And it was our eighth. And Richard, I think, keynoted for lunch, the first two or three. So it was always great to have Richard and all of you guys involved in that, those early summits with Governor Rick Snyder. But I think Governor Whitmer is taking it very seriously as well, as are, the whole Michigan government. And I agree. I think it's a good reflection on Michigan. I do think we do well here in Michigan. I give credit to the team because they've been doing a great job.
Yep.
And to give Richard his due, Richard has written a number of books. There Will Be Cyber War. Why don't you name a couple of your other books, Richard?
Most recently, I wrote a book on how to be an industry analyst called Curmudgeon. And then
very good likeness of you too, by the way.
I think so. I had to sit for that photo.
Yeah.
And then I've written a book called Security Yearbook, which is a history of the IT security industry.
Great book.
Yeah. All right, we got about 6 minutes left. I know there's some other topics, and particularly Dan, you want to touch on. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one of the big things that's not getting a lot of attention right now is the unemployment fraud challenge that's happening in a lot of states. I actually feel a lot better about the elections than I do about that. And I think what's happened, of course, everyone knows about the skyrocketing unemployment and the number of people who've applied legitimately, and the goal, of course, of getting out those checks quickly, getting people the money who need it, right, who are unemployed. And again, taking politics out of this is crossing, Democratic, Republican lines in all 50 states. Almost every state, I think every state actually, has had huge numbers of unemployment fraud where, people were getting letters in the mail saying, here, either verify your information or, go ahead and getting debit cards, that people were filing false unemployment claims. And, having a lot of that here in Michigan. It's around the country. It's really happening. I've seen it. I was on a show last week in Massachusetts. It's happening in Boston. It's happening really across the nation. And it's pretty scary. It's hard to get through even when if somebody does have, you've gotten those letters in the mail and, you try and say, this is fraudulent. I'm not unemployed. But even getting through to somebody, it's long wait times on the phone. And again, pretty much all 50 states. And then also, just a lot of this, where's it coming from? And why is this about a cybersecurity story? Well, those credentials are coming from the dark web. The people are, those hacks that have happened over the years are coming back to haunt us. They've got people's names, they've got your addresses, they've got your social security numbers, and they're filing unemployment benefits. And it's, I think it's honestly not getting better at the moment. I hope we get our arms around this. I know there's a lot of work being done on it here in Michigan and other states around the country. but it is a huge challenge right now. And obviously the focus on the election, the focus on, COVID-19 and everything, and it should be, but just not getting nearly as much coverage as I think. And again, it's impacting, just one more point. It's not just impacting those who are fraudulently having, their identity stolen, but it's also the ones who really need the benefits can't get through because then the phone lines are all jammed. So the same people are now working the fraudulent claims can't work the other claims. So it really is a huge challenge right now. I'd love to hear any thoughts that Richard has on it.
Yeah, I think it's just sad. Anytime you take, $1 trillion and try and pump it out to 30 million people, fraud is going to be there, right? And the kind that I hate the most, of course, is the actors coming from whatever part of the world that are tuned into enough that they can immediately start chugging and plugging and trying to get some of that multi-trillion-dollar payout. But you also have, fraudulent claims made by, people who are employed or unemployed, just as you do with, with any system that's writing checks, right? There's always fraud. I remember when Visa and MasterCard used to call me up and I'd talk about security with them. They'd go, security's not, it's 0.5% of our losses. 7% of our losses are fraud from card holders. Our customers are defrauding us. And it's just, we've got to have processes in place. And we could address this with the exact same technology I was talking about for voting.
Exactly.
Right? If somebody's got their digital certificate tied to their payment method, you just push a button and give them money and be all taken care of. So there's so much that technology could do for us. And we tend to do some of the things and then get overextended and expose ourselves to the security issues in doing so.
I just think one of the point though, Mike, I do think that, in this case, we've talked about these data breaches all the time and all these millions of records, billions of records, and that's now really coming back to bite. And I do think this is a classic case. And again, not Democratic Republican politics here, but just the push to get the money out fast. It was like speed. I think in many cases, they didn't do those verifications. They didn't do the checks they could. In many cases, I know people here in Michigan who they've been employed since the beginning of COVID. They haven't, they struggle, but they've had no unemployment. And they were, forms they got saying you've been unemployed, people getting checks going back to April 1st. Well, if you had just verifications, then, hey, they know that these people were getting paid. And so the verifications, we could do better. We can do better. All of us, and not just Michigan, all the states need to do better on the unemployment front. And I think we're going to be hearing a lot more about that in 2021. For sure. And it brings up breaches. So remember the talk of all the spam and related to COVID that increased and phishing attacks. That all occurred in March and a little bit into April and May. But everybody I talked to on the defensive side who's watching all this says it was just a huge spike, and it's tailed off since then. That's why I don't read as much about it. But, according to Poneman, the average dwell time for an attacker is about 207 days. So we have yet to see the results from that massive amount of phishing attacks, other than the actual, direct stolen credentials. But a lot of those led to attackers getting a foothold inside large enterprises. So I'm just waiting for the breach announcements, probably starting about now and into the rest of the year and early next year, that will be massive as these guys who've got a foothold are, working their way to the data store that they're after, and they're going to steal everything.
All right, we're going to have to leave it at that. We're out of time. So go ahead. And Richard, if people want to reach out to you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, just find me on Twitter. I'm at CyberWar.
And Dan?
Yeah, same. I'm at GovCSO, GovCSO, or you can see me on LinkedIn, and Lohrmann on cybersecurity is my blog.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, thanks, guys, for being with us today. Great informative show. Hopefully, a lot of folks will be able to see it and heed some of your advice.
Traditional four-year students love Lawrence Technological University's thriving campus life, but LTU has always met non-traditional students' needs, too. Lawrence Tech offers over 100 degree and certificate programs that can get adult students started or back on track. And most of our classes are conveniently offered evenings at our beautiful Southfield campus or online, so you can balance your social, family, and work life even while you power up your career. Lawrence Tech, where Blue Devils dare.